The winter of 1847 descended upon London like a glittering executioner, beautiful and merciless in equal measure. Within the Ashford estate, beneath chandeliers that wept crystal tears of candlelight, the season's most celebrated ball unfurled with all the calculated precision of a military campaign. Silk gowns whispered across marble floors. Violins sang their sweet deceptions. And in that temple of diamonds and duplicity, Lady Evelyn Hartley stood alone. She wore dove gray, the color of mourning, though no one had died. At least, no one whose death would be mourned by polite society. Only her dignity had perished 3 years prior in the cold chambers of divorce proceedings that had stripped her name clean of respectability. The gown itself was modest, high-necked, almost penitent, as if she might apologize her way back into their good graces. She would not. Evelyn's gloved fingers tightened against the ivory stem of her fan as conversations faltered in her wake. She felt their stares like pinpricks against her spine matrons clutching their daughters closer, as though divorce were contagious. Her dearest friend, Lady Margaret, had begged her to attend, had sworn the tongue was ready to soften, to forget. Margaret had always been an optimist. Evelyn had been a fool to believe her. My dear Evelyn. That voice, honeyed venom, familiar as her own heartbeat. She turned slowly, spine straight as a blade, and faced a man who had once promised her forever and delivered only ruin. Lord Thomas Blackwood stood resplendent in black evening clothes, his waistcoat embroidered with gold thread that spoke of newfound prosperity. Upon his arm, a porcelain doll of a girl, his second wife, Lady Cecilia, barely 20, with rose-petaled cheeks and eyes empty of anything resembling thought. The child wore rubies at her throat. Evelyn remembered when such gifts had come to her door, before Thomas's gambling debts devoured everything, including their marriage. Still no husband. Thomas's smile was a scalpel wrapped in silk. How quaint. One would think 3 years sufficient time to secure even modest prospects. The ballroom inhaled. Fans froze mid-flutter. Even the violins seemed to hesitate, as if the musicians themselves leaned closer to witness the kill. Evelyn's heart thrashed against her corset like a caged bird, but her face remained porcelain smooth. She had learned in those brutal months after the divorce that dignity was armor when one possessed nothing else. "Some of us, my lord," she replied, her voice carrying just far enough to satisfy the gossips, "have learned that a hasty match brings only hasty regrets." Cecilia blinked, uncomprehending. Thomas's jaw tightened. A matron behind them tittered into her champagne, but the victory was hollow, a sugar sculpture, pretty and poisonous and destined to collapse. Evelyn felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up her throat. Why had she come? What had she hoped to prove? That she could stand among them, head high, as if the world had not branded her with scarlet letters, as if she were not the cautionary tale mothers wielded against wayward daughters. She turned to retreat, to flee into the garden where shadows might offer sanctuary when the room shifted. It began as a murmur, a ripple of shock that spread like spilled wine across white linen. Conversations died. The orchestra stumbled through a measure, then surrendered to silence. Every head pivoted toward the grand entrance with the synchronized precision of a Greek chorus. He stood framed in the doorway like a portrait of winter itself. Adrian Thorne, Duke of Ravenswood, required no introduction. His name was whispered in drawing rooms and counting houses with equal reverence, the wealthiest peer in England. Owner of shipping empires and 3 legendary estates, it's a man who'd refused every matchmaking mama's machinations for a decade. He was tall, dark-haired, with a face carved from aristocratic angles and eyes the color of storm clouds, heavy with unspent rain. He was utterly, devastatingly untouchable. Evelyn had seen him only once before, years ago, at a garden party where she'd still been someone's wife. She'd thought him handsome then, in an abstract way, the way one might admire a statue cold, remote, more myth than man. Now those storm cloud eyes swept across the glittering assembly, past the debutantes who preened like exotic birds, past the ambitious mamas who elbowed forward, past the lords who straightened their cravats. His gaze moved with terrible purpose until it stopped. On her, Evelyn's breath caught. Surely not. Surely she imagined the intensity of that stare. The way his expression shifted softened as if he'd been searching the world and finally found what he sought. He moved through the crowd, and the sea of silk and superficiality parted before him. His footsteps echoed against marble like a heartbeat, measured and inexorable. Evelyn stood, frozen, a doe before the hunter, unable to flee, unable to breathe. Thomas Blackwood stepped forward, chest puffed with borrowed authority. "Your Grace, I fear you've approached the wrong." The Duke did not even grant him a glance. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn as he extended one gloved hand, palm upturned, an offering and a command in equal measure. "Forgive my tardiness, darling." The word detonated across the ballroom like cannon fire. Darling, darling, impossible, inconceivable. "Shall we?" Evelyn stared at that outstretched hand as if it were a lifeline thrown into drowning waters. Her mind screamed confusion, caution, disbelief. Her hand, her traitorous, trembling hand, rose of its own accord and slipped into his. His fingers closed around hers, warm even through 2 layers of gloves, and he drew her close as the orchestra, blessed them, remembered their purpose. The waltz began. He led her toward the center of the floor, toward every watching eye in London. Hey, and leaned close enough that his whisper brushed against her temple like a benediction. "Play along, my lady. We have much to discuss." The waltz swept them into motion, and Evelyn felt the world narrow to the span of his arms, one hand firm against her waist, the other cradling her fingers as if they were spun glass. Every eye in the ballroom burned against her skin, but the Duke's gaze held her captive, steady as a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice fracturing on the words. "I don't understand." "You needn't understand yet." His reply came low, meant only for her. "Only trust. Trust." The word was a foreign language, a currency she'd spent and lost. Yet something in his expression, not pity, never pity, but a fierce certainty made her feet follow where he led. They turned and turned again, a constellation of 2 while the world orbited around them, hungry and bewildered. When the music finally released them, he escorted her to the terrace doors. Thomas Blackwood stood paralyzed, his face the color of spoiled wine. The young wife beside him looked between them with the confused expression of a child witnessing adult complexities beyond her comprehension. Evelyn did not spare them a backward glance. Morning arrived, cruel and unforgiving, as mornings do when sleep has been murdered by confusion. Evelyn sat in her modest townhouse drawing room, still wearing yesterday's bewilderment like an ill-fitting cloak. Sunlight struggled through windows that overlooked a street too narrow for fashion, too respectable for scandal. At least, it had been. The knock came at 9 o'clock precisely. Her maid, Mrs. Dawson, loyal to a fault, the only servant who'd remained after the divorce, opened the door to reveal a footman in Ravenswood livery. He carried an arrangement so extravagant it seemed to have annexed several gardens on its journey. White roses, dozens of them, their petals still pearled with morning dew. Forget-me-nots scattered throughout like sapphire stars. The card nestled among the blooms bore only 5 words in decisive script. "For my wife." R. Evelyn's teacup clattered against its saucer. Wife, the word ricocheted through her skull, absurd and impossible. Had the Duke suffered some mental collapse? Was this elaborate cruelty a joke orchestrated by Thomas to twist the knife deeper? She had no time to formulate theories. The footman returned within the hour, bearing a velvet box. Inside, an emerald necklace caught the light and threw it back in defiant green firestones large enough to ransom kingdoms. Set in gold, so fine it seemed liquid. Another card, to match your eyes when you're furious. I look forward to earning that expression properly. By noon, a leather-bound first edition arrived Byron's poems, the very collection she'd mentioned loving at a garden party 5 years prior, when she'd still been foolish enough to speak of beauty in public. How could he possibly remember? She'd been nobody then, just another lord's wife in a sea of silk. Right? The final delivery came at dusk, a sealed document. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax. A deed to a cottage in Cornwall, perched above the sea. The kind of sanctuary she'd dreamed of during those suffocating nights when Thomas had come home reeking of perfume and lies. The Duke of Ravenswood had purchased it 3 months ago. 3 months before the ball, before the waltz, before impossible words like darling and wife had rearranged her universe. London's gossip machine devoured the story like starving wolves upon fresh meat. By evening, every scandal sheet screamed variations of the same headline: the Duke and the divorcee, a secret romance. Suddenly, invitations flooded her door, not from kindness, but from desperate curiosity. The same matrons who'd cut her dead now begged her attendance at tea, at musicales, at garden parties. They wanted to dissect her, to understand how the untouchable Duke had been snared. Thomas arrived at her door like a summer storm, all thunder and destructive wind. "What game are you playing?" He pushed past Mrs. Dawson with the entitlement of a man who'd once held rights here. "How did you trap him? Our lies did you spin?" Evelyn rose from her chair with the deliberate grace she perfected in divorce court when standing still had been her only weapon. "I've told no lies, Thomas. Perhaps that's a novelty you cannot recognize. You're nobody," he spat. And she watched spittle gather at the corner of his mouth, such an ugly thing, rage, when it wore a gentleman's face. A used, discarded thing. He'll realize his mistake, and when he does, the door opened. Adrian Thorne entered her drawing room as if he owned it, and perhaps, in some metaphysical sense, he did, for he'd filled it with flowers, with gifts, with the possibility of something Evelyn had stopped believing existed. He wore riding clothes, his dark coat tailored to perfection, and carried the scent of leather and winter air. "You'll leave." The Duke's voice held no heat, which somehow made it more terrifying. Now, Thomas drew himself up, puffing like a toad. "She was my wife. She was never yours." Adrian stepped closer, and Thomas retreated, despite himself. "You possessed her legally. A man might possess a chair, a horse, a pocket watch, but she was never yours to claim." The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. Thomas opened his mouth, found nothing that wouldn't damn him further, and fled. Silence settled, thick and complicated. Evelyn stood motionless, afraid that movement might shatter whatever spell had conjured this impossible protector. "I've brought my carriage," Adrian said, his tone shifting to something gentler, almost careful. "We should be seen together in Hyde Park. Society must understand this is no fleeting fancy, Your Grace." The title felt wrong on her tongue, too formal for a man who'd called her darling in a room full of wolves. This charade must end. "You owe me no kindness, and I'll not be party to some cruel jest. Do you truly believe this is a joke?" He crossed the small room in 3 strides, bringing with him that presence that made spaces shrink. 3 years ago, I sat in the gallery during your divorce proceedings. I watched justice fail you, while cowards who called themselves gentlemen turned away. The revelation struck like lightning. She'd never seen him there, hadn't looked beyond her own humiliation. "I've thought of little else since," he continued, and his storm cloud eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "A woman of such grace, destroyed by a man of such weakness." Her breath caught. "Why would you come?" He extended his hand, just as he had the previous night, palm upturned, an invitation written in flesh. "Let me show London who you truly are. Hyde Park, glittered with afternoon society, the serpentine reflecting clouds like a liquid mirror. They walked the fashionable path where reputation was bartered and destroyed with equal frequency. His hand rested at her elbow proper, respectable, yet somehow the touch burned through fabric and propriety alike. Every parasol turned their direction. Every conversation paused. Kala Evelyn felt like an exotic creature on display, something between specimen and spectacle. A photographer appeared from behind an oak, his camera already positioned. Tomorrow's newspapers would feast on this image. Lord Ashford, an older peer whose sneer had perfected itself over decades of practiced cruelty, intercepted their path. Ravenswood, I see you're slumming today. The insult landed precisely where it's ended. Evelyn felt the old shame rising, hot and familiar. Adrian went very still. Speak of the Duchess of Ravenswood with respect, he said, his voice dropping to a register that promised violence wrapped in velvet, or answer to me at dawn. Duchess. The word detonated across the park like cannon fire. Ashford blanched. Nearby ladies gasped into their gloves. Even the ducks on the Serpentine seemed to pause mid-paddle. Evelyn turned to him, breathless, the world spinning off its axis. I am no duchess. We are not married. Adrian's expression softened, and something in his eyes made her heart stumble. Not yet, perhaps. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, cream-colored and sealed with his crest. But we will be, if you'll have me. He pressed it into her hands, his fingers lingering against hers. Open this tonight, alone, and decide if you can forgive me. Before she could form words, before her mind could catch her. Racing heart, he stepped back, bowed with devastating formality, and left her standing in Hyde Park while the world whispered, and the envelope burned against her palms like a brand. Firelight painted shadows across Evelyn's sitting room walls as she turned the envelope over in trembling hands. The Ravenswood crest gleamed in crimson wax, a raven clutching a sword, appropriate for a man who'd swooped into her life like something both dangerous and divine. She broke the seal. His handwriting emerged elegant and precise, each letter formed with the care of a man accustomed to wielding power through words. Lady Evelyn, I confess a sin that may cost me everything, yet silence has become unbearable. 3 years ago, I did not merely observe your divorce proceedings from some distant gallery seat. I was the anonymous benefactor who paid your legal fees when your family abandoned you to Thomas S. Mercy's. The paper shook in her grip. She'd never known who'd rescued her from complete destitution, had assumed some distant relation, took pity, but him, Duke, she'd barely known existed. I have watched over you since entering the cottage, the quarterly sum deposited to your account, the recommendations that kept you from society's absolute exile. Not from pity, never from pity, because when I saw you stand in that courtroom, spine straight while they dismantled your life, I witnessed a courage that put every titled lord to shame. I fell in love with your defiance, with the way you refused to weep when they expected tears, with how you thanked the judge even as he granted your husband freedom and left you with nothing. Evelyn's vision blurred. She'd thought herself alone, abandoned, surviving through sheer stubborn will. Yet all this time, invisible hands had caught her before she could truly fall. When I saw Thomas mock you at the ball, something inside me fractured. I could no longer remain your secret guardian. Forgive my presumption calling you my wife before earning the right, but I would make it truth if you'd grant me the honor. Not from obligation, not from gratitude, but from a love I can no longer contain. Yours, if you'll have me, Adrian. The letter fell from her fingers as sobs tore through her chest, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming terror of hope. Could she trust this? Trust him? Her heart had been so thoroughly broken that she'd built a fortress from the shards, and now he asked her to dismantle it, stone by careful stone. She didn't hear the commotion downstairs until Mrs. Dawson's frightened cry pierced her reverie. Evelyn rushed to the landing. Below, Thomas staggered into her foyer, brandy drunk and venomous. Where is he? Your Duke. Does he know what you are? What you've done? Leave. Evelyn's voice emerged steadier than her racing heart. You have no right here, right? Thomas laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. I made you. You were nobody's daughter, and I gave you a name. Then you couldn't even manage that, couldn't give me an heir. Couldn't keep my interest because you gambled away every penny and warmed our bed with your mistress. The words came cold, factual, and she watched them land like blows. His face contorted. You think you've won? That the Duke's infatuation will last? You're a used, discarded thing. He'll realize his mistake, and when he does, you'll have nothing. Again, the door swung open with such force it cracked against the wall. Adrian entered like an avenging angel, still in evening clothes from whatever engagement he'd abandoned. His jaw was set, his storm-cloud eyes glacial. 2 footmen flanked him, solid as cavalry. You'll leave, Adrian said, descending each step with predatory grace. Now, and you'll never speak to her again. Thomas swayed, but held his ground, Dutch courage lending him false strength. She was my wife. She was never yours. Adrian stopped 1 step above Thomas, using height like a weapon. You possessed her legally, yes. A man might possess furniture, livestock, silverware, but she was never yours to claim. You had a treasure and treated it as trash. Now, remove yourself, or I'll have you removed. Thomas sneered, desperate now. On what grounds? I've done nothing illegal, haven't you? Adrian's smile was a blade. I've purchased your outstanding debts, Blackwood, all of them. Every gambling marker, every merchant's bill, every penny you owe across London. I now hold paper worth £15,000 with your signature. The color drained from Thomas's face. I will call them due, Adrian continued with surgical precision, unless you depart England within a fortnight. Ireland, perhaps, or the continent. Somewhere your presence won't contaminate the air she breathes. You cannot? I can. I have. Guards, escort this gentleman out. Thomas was removed bodily, his protests fading into the night. The door closed, and suddenly the foyer felt impossibly small, impossibly intimate. Adrian turned to her, and she saw exhaustion behind his carefully maintained composure. I apologize for the intrusion. When your maid sent word he'd forced entry, I came immediately. You've been having me watched. She should feel violated, perhaps, but couldn't muster the indignation. It's protected. He climbed the remaining stairs until they stood level. There's a difference. Why? The question emerged, raw, stripped of pretense. Why me? You could have anyone, every debutante, every widow, every heat, knelt, a duke, kneeling in her shabby townhouse on worn carpet, looking up at her as if she were the one with the title, the power, the choice. 'Cause when the world was cruel, you remained kind. When they mocked you, you held your head high. When justice failed you, you didn't become bitter. You became steel wrapped in silk. His hands reached for hers, and she let him take them. You are not broken, Evelyn. You are forged. I'm terrified, she whispered. So am I. The admission cost him. She could see it. Terrified, you'll refuse. Terrified I've overstepped so egregiously, you'll never forgive me. Terrified that I'll fail you as he did. You won't? The certainty surprised her, rising from some deep place she thought Thomas had destroyed. Then marry me. His voice broke slightly. Not for protection, not for revenge against those who wronged you. But because I am wholly, desperately in love with you. Because I want to spend my life earning your smiles. Because you deserve to be cherished, and I am begging for the chance. Evelyn looked at this impossible man, powerful beyond measure, yet vulnerable before her. She thought of the girl she'd been, the woman Thomas had tried to destroy, the survivor she'd become. She thought of 3 years spent merely existing, and a terrifying, exhilarating possibility of truly living. Yes, the word emerged soft but certain. Yes, I'll marry you. He rose and pulled her into his arms, and she felt something inside her some last calcified piece of protection finally crack open. His kiss tasted of relief and promise in the future she'd stop believing in. 2 weeks later, Westminster Cathedral's bells sang their ancient song while London held its breath. Evelyn walked down the aisle in ivory silk, emeralds at her throat, past every face that had once turned away. A Comus had fled to Dublin, a ghost of his former arrogance. Lady Cecilia had already found a new husband, proving some women collected them like china patterns. But Evelyn looked only forward, toward the man waiting at the altar with storm-cloud eyes that saw all of her the scars, the strength, the terrified hope, and loved her anyway. When Adrian spoke his vows, his voice carried through the hushed cathedral. I vow to love you in light and shadow both, to be your shield and your sanctuary, today and beyond the grave. The kiss lingered scandalously long. The congregation gasped. Evelyn smiled against his lips. At the reception, as champagne flowed and the orchestra played, Evelyn stood on the terrace of Ravenswood House, overlooking the garden ablaze with lanterns. Adrian found her there, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pressed his lips to her temple. Regrets? He murmured. She turned in his embrace, this man who moved heaven and earth for her, and smiled. Only that I didn't say yes sooner. Behind them, through the French doors, society celebrated. But here, in this quiet moment, they were simply two people who defound each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful from the ruins. The Duchess of Ravenswood had arrived, and she would never be diminished again.